to the PCCEP Settlement and Policy Subcommittee meeting tonight, November 8th. And I'm going to ask Ms. Alfreda if she don't mind moving in the direction of facilitating with us tonight. And again, thanks everyone.
I saw you go on the mute there, Samir. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, whichever you prefer.
Go ahead.
Take over after this.
Let's do it. Let's pass the ball to Samir.
All right.
Samir,
So this is
it's usually a Dory thing, and I'm not clear.
Yeah. So this is a public meeting of the Portland Committee of Community Engaged Policing. It is subject to City Administrative Code, as you can see on the screen, as well as Oregon Public Meetings Law provisions, which are relevant to this. The chat will be included in the meeting record. It is being recorded as well. And we will have the chat on. So we'll do introductions at this point. My name is Samir Kanal. I am the Advisory Boards and Commissions Manager for the Community Safety Division, filling in for Dory, who's the project manager, who's out today. And I will ask, while we do the remaining introductions, community members, please feel free to post an introduction in the chat. I'll pass it over to Pastor Weisner to start the PCCEP members' introductions, and then we'll go to city staff and other attendees.
Thank you, Shamir. I am Pastor Robin Weisner, Chair of the Settlement and Policy, as well as co-chair with my fabulous co-chair tonight, Ms. Celeste, as always. I will pass it to her.
Oh, I'm actually in observer mode tonight, but good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Celeste Carey, and I am the co-chair of the PCCEP committee. And I will, let's see, who else is in attendance here? Let's see. Oh, I do not see any of my colleagues here. So, Pastor, I'm just going to turn it back to you, and you can hand it over.
We do have Molly here as well. So I'll pass it to her if she's able to unmute.
Hi guys,
Molly.
My name is Malay Ramos. I am with the PCCEP committee. I started this year. I am a big activist in Portland, Oregon. I passed Measure 114 with We Win LLC with Caroline Fidget. I was on basically ground zero with the thousands of volunteers that we passed to stop gun violence in Portland. Work with a lot of different nonprofits here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a Portland native. I go by she, her, and Aya. Thank you very much. And I can pass it to Samir. Have you went?
Yeah, I introduced before, but I see Kip, Carrie, and Nathan are all here. So whoever'd like to go first there.
Awesome.
Hi. Yeah, I can jump in real quick. I'm Kip Silverman. My pronouns are he, him. I am relatively new PCCEP member, and I apologize. I'll be off camera most of the meeting.
Carrie, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you. Hi, I'm Carrie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a relatively new PCCEP member observing tonight. Looking forward to it.
Great. And Nathan?
Hi, everyone. Nathan Castle, he, him pronouns, PCCEP member and member of this committee. Good evening, everyone. I do have to leave in about 10-15 minutes to go to another meeting, unfortunately. So I'll only be here briefly, but good to see everyone here tonight. And thanks to the presenters for sharing their report.
Thanks. And if any of the other city staff, including PPB staff, would like to introduce themselves, as well as DOJ and COCL, we'd love to have you introduce yourselves at this point.
I'll jump in. Hi, folks. Stephanie Howard here from the mayor's office. Good to be with you.
Welcome, Stephanie.
Good evening. Mary Claire Buckley from the Portland Police Bureau.
Welcome, Mary.
Thanks, Reverend.
I'm Christoph with the COCL team, and with me are several other members of the COCL teams. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi there, Monique Jenkins. I'm the project manager for the COCL team.
Dr. Stephen Holt, Tri-Excellence Outreach Coordinator for the COCL team. Good to see you, Samir.
Welcome, welcome.
Melissa Gutierrez, analyst for the COCL team.
Welcome.
Thanks, and I think I see Jonas Geisler here as well.
Hi, for those of you whom I've not met yet, I'm Jonas Geisler, one of the attorneys from the Civil Rights Division. I've been on this case since the beginning.
Thank you so much. Good to have you all here. If any other city or DOJ or COCL staff would like to introduce themselves, now's the chance. And again, any members of the public, please feel free to post in the chat.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is Shailene Morris for the COCL team. Nice to be here.
And I'm Janie Gullickson, also with the COCL team.
Welcome, Janie.
Great, thanks.
And I am Afrida. I'm just a facilitator. Well, I am a facilitator, not just.
Thank you, Afrida. Would one of our new members, either Carrie or Kip or Malay, be willing to read the community agreements out loud for today's meeting?
Oh yeah, I definitely can for you guys.
Thanks.
So community agreements tonight is listen actively and respectfully, share airtime, be present and open to new information and perspectives, assume positive intent, respect each other, respect the group, speak your own truth, communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully, ask questions to clarify, call out bias, and be okay with ambiguity.
Thank you, Malay. So today's meeting, I'm going to do the overview of today's meeting and then the updates, and then pass it over to Pastor Weisner. As a side note, thanks for bearing with me as I'm coming back into mode for PCCEP after not doing this for a little bit. So today we'll do this introduction and updates. After that, there'll be a presentation from the compliance officer, community liaison team, as well as the DOJ, the Department of Justice, on the current dual monitoring process. Then there'll be the quarterly town hall by the compliance officer and community liaison on the Q2 report on the city's compliance with the settlement agreement. If there's time prior to that, we'll take some Q&A. They'll do a 5-minute break at around 7, come back and do more Q&A, as well as open public comment for the remainder of the meeting. And there are 2 updates that we're going to share today really briefly. One of them is related to the recommendation from PCCEP back in, I believe it was February, to have a independent monitor appointed as part of the settlement agreement to monitor that, which is what the update is that today City Council adopted approved amendments to the settlement agreement, and included in those changes were the creation of an independent monitor position. This still has to go through a fairness hearing with the court, presided over by Judge Simon in this case, before it's entered as an order of the court, at which point it would be implemented. And it also includes other changes that are pretty significant, and maybe the DOJ or COCL team can talk about those if they're relevant to what you were intending to talk about, including the creation of self-monitoring and partial termination portions of the agreement. Also, if Stephanie, if you'd like to talk to that, please feel free as well. So that's the first update. Again, it was approved by council today, and it'll need to go to a fairness hearing and only be implemented once it's an order of the court. The second thing is that next week, the City Council will be considering further amendments to the settlement agreement, as well as proposing a city code package to the Department of Justice and the U.S. Court in the settlement agreement case related to the creation of a community police oversight board. This is based on the work of the Police Accountability Commission, but the text that'll be discussed next week is the City Council's proposed code, as well as their proposed settlement agreement text. And that is next Wednesday at 2:00 will be the agenda item for that. And there'll be more sent out over the email lists if you are subscribed to those. So please subscribe if you're not. I think that's everything I was going to add. I don't know if there's anything else to say here. Okay, in that case, I will happily pass it over to our chair, Pastor Weisner.
Excellent. Thank you, Samir, and everyone. I'll do the reading from the slides here. Background on current dual monitoring process for settlement agreement. We have to speak on that tonight. We will have Jonas from this Department of Justice, and Tom and his team from the COCL team. Next slide. Well, I guess there's no slide. Well, let me go from here. As we know, a lot of things have taken place as today, as you've heard with the current appointment today from City Council, from the recommendations, one from where that PCCEP had a recommendation to have an independent monitor. A little background on that, as I was speaking to Dr. Haynes earlier today, is that I see this as a progress forward. The ideal of that is that really, as long as we've been doing this with the agreement, we really actually are in the place right now where we actually was at the beginning of what we requested from the community at the very first. Since we're here tonight and it came on timely, I thought it would be a very good idea to have the report to be explained to the new members as well as those in the community, how the reporting actually is actually reviewed and looked at. And as most of the people know, that there are always sometimes a little difference between the two in the way that they report. And this will be a great time, I believe, now to kind of show the differences and have a real good discussion around what those reports and how those report reflects and what they actually are giving as information. So had a great conversation with Jared and wanted to see if they would mind coming tonight talking about how the differences are, how their reporting compares with the COCL report. So Mr. Jonas, if you don't mind starting this dialogue from that position of the meeting tonight.
Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Can you all hear me well? Great, great. So the typical settlement agreement or consent decree that DOJ has with most cities would have the defendant, the city, and the United States as the plaintiff, and the court monitor that works for the court. And the court monitor would do quarterly, semi-annual, or annual reports. The parties, city and United States, would comment on those, but the monitor calls all the balls and strikes, does all the assessments of compliance, does all the technical assistance, which is that term of art we use for saying, give some expert advice. In this particular case, we don't have that set up. We don't have a court monitor that works for the court. We have the United States is both the plaintiff and the monitor. So we get to make the decision. You're in or out of compliance, city, and the city provides information on quarterly reports of its own. The city's quarterly reports inform the United States, but those aren't the only reports. When we negotiated the settlement agreement, we knew that we would need some expertise on the ground and some extra help. So the city and the United States negotiated to have the compliance officer and community liaison, the COCL, issue quarterly reports on compliance and on the outcomes of the settlement agreement. They're supposed to call the balls and strikes, and they're supposed to come up with measures for the outcome measures. However, their reports aren't binding on the United States. They're not binding on the city. The United States and the city offer comments back to COCL on their draft reports. We give them most of the time written responses to their draft reports, and they are able to then modify the reports if they find favor in any of the positions or answer questions that we raise. The COCL's reports, though, only inform the parties. So they can inform the United States and they can inform the city. And the COCL can also do the technical assistance where the city says, hey, we need some more information on X. X might be body-worn cameras. X might be procedural justice, something big that Dr. Rosenbaum hit on for years. And COCL will offer technical assistance above and beyond just the quarterly reports. When the United States does an assessment, we look at the consent decree, we look at the quarterly reports from the city, we look at on-the-ground monitoring that we do, going to the trainings, doing ride-alongs, what have you. And we also look at the COCL quarterly reports. And then we do a huge document request, and Mary Claire's familiar with these because she's been in charge of producing those documents to us. We do a huge document request for each of the paragraphs of the consent decree and say, give us the data. While we're informed by COCL, we're not bound by COCL's assessments. We like the COCL's assessments. They're very helpful. They're extremely informative. It offers much more insight than we could do on our own. But then we put out a report, and the settlement agreement does not require that we have annual or semi-annual reports. It required one check-in at 2 years. And we have had the tradition, in this case, instead of trying to do a report every year. Sometimes it slips to not quite every year, and sometimes it doesn't cover every area. But we have had a scoring mechanism like COCL's, compliant, non-compliant, partially compliant, and we've come out with a report almost every year. Tom?
I think that Jonas did a really good job of kind of covering the setup of this arrangement. I think one of the things that I'd really like to highlight too is where possible, DOJ and COCL attempt to observe training concurrent with each other. We attempt to look at the same things, and as Mr. Geisler said, that doesn't mean that one of us, must inform the other, must, agree with the other. I think what we've seen across the years is when we've been looking at the same things, we've generally come to the same conclusions, and the DOJ's reports have generally reflected our reports. I know, as we'll talk about tonight, we do quarterly reports, and the aggregate of those quarterly reports, oftentimes then will just go into DOJ's annual report. But I think that, like I said, I think that the thing to highlight here is we're all independent of each other. The city, DOJ, PPB will all look at the same thing, and where our subject matter experts identify a concern or a barrier to substantial compliance, we'll identify that and we'll put it in our reports, and that will just go inform DOJ's.
Pastor, are there specific questions that we could answer for you or the other members of the committee?
Pastor Weisner, you said you're having connections trouble?
Yeah, I'm not hearing.
Would you like me to go ahead and step in, Pastor Weisner?
Would you please?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, so at this point, are there any questions for that overview that folks might have? Any PCCEP members have any questions about that overview?
I did not even get the overview, so.
Okay.
I see Barb's got her hand up, unless we're going only for PCCEP members at the moment.
Yeah, we're prioritizing PCCEP members, but we definitely will have space for our community members to jump in the conversation here shortly. Okay. So on the next slide, I think we could go to, the COCL Town report. So to you, Tom.
Sure. Would I have the ability to share my screen?
Yes.
Sure. And I apologize because I know every time I do one of these presentations, I'm not always able to see if somebody has their hand up. So if there's somebody who does have their hand up and I don't pause, please excuse me. So welcome everybody. This is the town hall for the COCL's 2023 Q2 report. I know one of the things that we had wanted to do is kind of better set the stage, and I think that this introduction conversation in terms of kind of who COCL is, who DOJ is, and what our roles are in the process. I think it was something that I know that we had wanted to do a little bit more of. So I wanted to start the presentation tonight with just kind of an overall discussion of what it is that COCL does and what it is that COCL doesn't do. So as Jonas and I had talked about, the COCL, we're completely independent of the city, PPB, and DOJ. We conduct our own reports, we review the documents, we review the data using our subject matter expertise. And what we then take from that is we conduct quarterly compliance reports where we look at each of the requirements of the settlement agreement and make a determination as to whether the PPB and the city have complied. But I also did want to talk about what COCL doesn't do. We don't manage, we don't direct the PPB in the city. Our reports, as Mr. Geisler said, our reports are there to inform the parties, but we're not in charge of the PPB. As Mr. Geisler also said, we don't make the final determinations of compliance. We provide our quarterly reports with our recommendations for achieving substantial compliance, but we don't make that final determination that falls to the actual monitor, which is DOJ. One of the other things that we don't do is we don't create additional reform requirements. We are bound by the settlement agreement. The settlement agreement was a negotiated process between the city and the DOJ, and it's we have to respect how we're kind of bound by the settlement agreement, what it is we are authorized to look at, what it is that we're not authorized to look at. And we might identify reform efforts that would be in the best interest of the city, would be in the best interest of PPB and the community. However, if it's not tied to a settlement agreement process, we don't get much of a say in that. So that's kind of just a little bit of an overview of kind of our role. I did want to also go into our quarterly reports. These quarterly reports, as you can see from this one that we're going to be discussing tonight, they can get lengthy. And each quarter we have to look at each substantive paragraph. So the process for doing that is first we collect the information. We look at use of force reports. We look at training reports. We look at a number of different reports or data. We'll go through a little bit tonight of the outcome assessments that we've done using the data provided by PPB in the city. We look at PPB's policies, any changes to policies, any changes to training. We also do observations, both virtually and in person, and then we conduct site visits. I'll be out there next week conducting a site visit. And we were out there in August. I was out there twice in August to conduct site visits. So we do all these things to collect the information, but then we've got to do something with that information. So each quarter we create these quarterly reports. We assess the compliance with each substantive paragraph. The settlement agreement is long. We look at what is specifically required by the settlement agreement for PPB or the city to make changes, and we look to see whether they've done that. As part of our quarterly reporting process, we also conduct the outcome assessments, like I said, and like I said, we'll get into some of those outcome assessments that we had done for this report. After we create a report, we release it as a draft report. And there is a 30-day public comment period where we can receive feedback. We also have these town halls, where this is the purpose of the town hall tonight, is to be able to present our report, hear the feedback, and then afterwards we go back and we incorporate that feedback. I can, for those of you who have who've been with us this entire, the entire 9 years, we've heard your feedback, and in many instances we've incorporated it. And what we also do is we take the comments that we receive both in written form as well as the comments that we receive on these town halls, and we provide a response to them. And then from those, from where we've incorporated feedback and where we've responded to comments, we then finalize the report. That is the end of the reporting cycle. However, as part of our development of our quarterly reports, we also have ongoing collaboration. We have the community engagement team that continues to do outreach. We have an email address, portlandcocal@cna.org, that we're always welcoming comments or thoughts, and we will respond to those. So as we're doing these quarterly reports, please don't think that this is the only opportunity to provide feedback. It's an ongoing relationship. Within each report, what we do is we take, we assign compliance ratings, and we provide a report card. For each substantive paragraph, we will either use the rating of substantial compliance or partial compliance. As I said, we've been doing this for about 9 years now. When we first started off, we also had non-compliance and not non-compliance, but initial steps taken. For all of the paragraphs within the settlement agreement, we've gotten past those non-compliance and initial steps taken ratings, and we are just at this moment left with substantial compliance and partial compliance. Where we find partial compliance, we don't just say you didn't make the grade, you're in partial compliance, and leave it at that. What we then do is we identify and provide recommendations to the city and to PPB for achieving substantial compliance, to be able to say, in our opinion, from our expertise, this is what needs to happen in order to get to substantial compliance. And, like I said before, oftentimes these recommendations are also reflected in the DOJ's reports, where they've been informed by ours. So I'll now go into the report that we're talking about tonight, the 2023 Q2 compliance assessment. Within this report, we had found substantial compliance with 75 paragraphs. This is 2 more than in our last report. For this report, we found that paragraph 129 and paragraph 191 had moved into substantial compliance. We still find partial compliance with 21 paragraphs, and you can see the distribution of these across the different sections, with 7 in use of force, 2 in training, 2 in the employee information system, 6 in officer accountability, and 4 in the additional remedy section. And we'll go through the different ones that have reached substantial compliance, as well as those that are still in partial compliance. We'll go through each of these sections. So for section 3, use of force, again, because I know that a lot of people may not have been here from the very beginning of it, one of the things that we wanted to do was discuss not only where additional steps need to be taken, but also provide, the progress that has been made when you look across the settlement agreement. So within section 3, PPB, over the last 9 years, they've updated the policies, their use of force policies, their force review policies. We've looked at those and said that these policies now conform with the requirements of the settlement agreement. We've also seen PPB officers use conducted electric weapons, also known as tasers, consistent with the requirements of the settlement agreement. We've seen patrol supervision staffing be increased as a result of the settlement agreement. Getting more experienced sergeants, to be able to supervise the officers and to have that training. We've looked and we've seen a much greater standardization of the FDCR, which stands for Force Data Collection Report. And the AAR form is the after action review, but this is where the FDCR is where officers will report their uses of force. And the AAR is where supervisors will report the investigation that they did, as well as the chain of command reviewing the investigation that was conducted. So we've seen these forms more standardized as well as expanded based on the settlement agreement. We've seen areas of PPB's force audit being in substantial compliance. If you review our report, we've called them phase 1 and phase 2 audits. The phase 1 looks at whether officers are completing their FDCRs comprehensively. And we've seen a really good audit approach from the PPB with respect to that. We've also seen some fairly impressive force trend evaluation that the force inspector and the force inspector's team of analysts conduct. This relates to paragraph 76, where they put out quarterly reports. So we've seen these good reforms and good progress in section 3. What we still need to see, and this is where the paragraphs are in partial compliance, is consistent force reporting of there's a force type control against resistance. We've identified a couple of cases where force against resistance was used but wasn't reported, or where there appears to be inconsistency with how the force type is defined and applied. We continue to need to see full and complete AAR investigations by supervisors, as well as AAR reviews by the chain of command and the force inspector. For this quarter, we had seen really good force reporting, force reviews. The reason that this is still in partial compliance is because this most recent quarter was the first time that we had seen that level of compliance with the settlement agreement. And what we need to do is to see that continue and to see ongoing and verified compliance. We also need to see a little bit greater clarity in identifying use of force outliers. And I think that we can talk about this a little bit more when we get into the employee information system. But identifying those officers who use force at a statistically higher rate than their peer officers, and kind of clarity from PPB as to exactly how that happens. For achieving substantial compliance, we've made a number of recommendations. The first is to review policy and training, particularly as it relates to the control against resistance, to identify where that inconsistency or that lack of clarity lies. We've also recommended that when significant reporting or review deficiencies, either by the officer or by the chain of command supervisors, when we see significant deficiencies occur, we need to see consistent correction of those. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that they haven't been corrected, and then it just leaves that gap of nothing had been done. And so what we really want to see is that correction when they're identified. And like I said, we're also looking for clarification of that process for identifying the outlying officers. As I said, I'll be in Portland next week. And one of the meetings that we have scheduled is a discussion of these recommendations. I talked about the outcome assessments that we include. For this quarter, we conducted an outcome assessment for use of force. This is the applications of force used by PPB. These aren't all of the force types that are used. These are the ones that are more than 2%. There's a lot of force types that don't get used that often. And so we just wanted to focus on the ones that get used more often than not. I would say the big takeaway from these charts is when we're looking at control against resistance and resisted handcuffing, these are category 4 uses of force. They are the lowest level of reportable force, and these constitute about 60% of the use of force applications that PPB uses. From there, then we go into takedowns as the third highest, but again, that's at 11% when we see 36% for control against resistance and 24% for resisted handcuffing. We also looked at the demographic information of subjects who were of individuals subjected to use of force events. Obviously, I think the thing that stands out most here is that 26.9% of subjects who had force used against them were Black Portlanders. And given the census information, I think that's where people point to. One of the things that I know that we've discussed in the past is there's a little bit of unreliability when you're using census data as the benchmark, but it is something that I know that the Training Advisory Council has asked PPB to explore a little bit more with, and that I know the COCL team has had discussions with as well. We then looked at use of force against persons with actual or perceived mental illness. One of the things that we did for here is we compared the last 1 year of data to the last 5 years of data. Across the last 5 years, we've seen about 80%. It was 85% for the last year of people not being in an actual or perceived mental health crisis. When we look at the types of force that are used, though, too, again, this somewhat mirrors the broader force statistics, in that control against resistance and resisted handcuffing are the 2 types of force above and beyond any other type of force that are used. And then we look at the type of resistance that's associated with the use of force event. And we see in the last year, officers identified the subject's resistance level as active in 91% of the use of force events against persons who were in actual or perceived mental health crisis. I will go to the section for the training. Again, looking at the areas that are in substantial compliance and that have been in substantial compliance for quite some time with some of these. PPB does a comprehensive needs assessment, identifies where training is needed across the department. They have a number of areas that they look at, including use of force statistics, including changes to the law, changes to policy. They also do a fairly comprehensive evaluation of the training that they have delivered. PPB uses a 4-stage evaluation process that has been long approved by both COCL and DOJ, and that really looks at not only the training environment and the learning, but also the demonstration of abilities. And there's a little bit that they've also been able to do in looking at organizational impact, but that can get difficult depending on the training. PPB has a learning management system that contains all of the training records for all officers within the Bureau. I'll get into that a little bit with the areas that aren't in substantial compliance, but overall their LMS captures the training that they provide. They also have standardized training standards that have long been in place and that are consistent with the settlement agreement. One of the things that we do regularly is observe training, both the training content and material, as well as the delivery of training, where we'll go on site and observe the training. Again, the training that we've seen has, for the most part, been consistent with the settlement agreement. I understand that there's history of training not complying with the settlement agreement, but I would say that for the most part, that the training that we've received has been comprehensive and beneficial to the officers. We've seen a good effort by PPB in auditing their training. This is something that I know that had just more recently happened. It's not an annual audit, but when the auditing has occurred, we've seen PPB be able to identify areas where improvement is needed. And finally, the presentations to TAC by the force inspector fall under this section 4. And again, I think that TAC's done a good job of being able to ask questions during the presentations, being able to ask for more information, and really kind of going into the data. At present, the areas in this report that aren't in substantial compliance is the need for a centralized database for specialty certifications, such as, you know, if you're an ECIT officer or if you have certain weapons qualifications. A centralized database, this actually came from PPB's audit, that there was no centralized database. In our last report, we had said that our recommendation was to create that centralized database. At present, in the third quarter, that centralized database was implemented. So what we'll do is in our Q3 report, we'll provide a much fuller update with respect to the changes that have happened for section 4 in that paragraph. With section 5, community-based mental health services, this has been a section that has long been in substantial compliance. The areas that we've continued to find in substantial compliance is the existence of the Unity Center, as well as PPB collaboration with community-based mental health service providers, as well as ongoing participation from PPB and the city in committees that are focused on mental health and wellness. All paragraphs within this section are in substantial compliance, and our recommendations mainly are that PPB and the city should maintain their efforts for this section. For section 6 with crisis intervention team, again, this is a section that has long been in substantial compliance. We see an overall a well-functioning behavioral health unit, and the behavioral health unit within PPB also includes the enhanced crisis intervention team, the behavioral health response team, and the service coordination team. So when we look at each one of these programs, we look at their operation, and we've looked at outcome assessments associated with them as well, and seen positive impacts of these programs. PPB also does a really good job of tracking and using outcome data associated with either the primary response to a mental health crisis in the form of ECIT or follow-up secondary responses as BHRT and SCT do. PPB not only has done these trackings and data analysis, they presented on them at the CIT International Conference. There's a real use of the BHU data that PPB does, and they should be applauded for that. We've also continued to find substantial compliance in the operation of the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Committee. They've done a lot of good work to inform the policies and training of PPB, not only for ECIT officers, but for all officers getting crisis intervention training. You know, like I said, all officers do get crisis intervention training. We've reviewed that, the training that is provided by PPB, and continue to find that it all complies with the settlement agreement, as well as specialized training for the ECIT officers and BHRT members. And then finally, we have found substantial compliance with BOAC operations. I'll get into one element of that on the next slide, but all paragraphs are in substantial compliance from the COCL's perspective on this section. The one recommendation that we have for maintaining that substantial compliance is recently BOAC has provided a policy for dispatching, for triaging to PSR. What we will need to see for maintaining substantial compliance now is developed focused training for PSR. The crisis intervention section is also another section for this report where we conducted an outcome assessment. And if you're wondering why outcome assessments happen for some sections and not for others, when we go to do our Q3 report, the sections that don't have an outcome assessment for this quarter will get an outcome assessment for that quarter. And the requirement is to conduct them on a semi-annual basis. And so what we do is each quarter we roll in some of the sections into the outcome assessments and just put them all in our report. These are the quarterly ECIT calls, and by precinct. I don't think it's much of a surprise that Central Precinct has the most ECIT calls across the three, with East and North being somewhere around 200 to 225 on average. One of the things that we also do is we not only look at the number of ECIT calls across the precincts, but we also look at the proportion of ECIT calls across the precinct and match that up with the proportion of ECIT officers. And as seen in our report and on this slide, there is a lot of parity between where the ECIT calls are happening and where the ECIT officers are stationed. However, although we see this parity, one of the things that we note is in the response rates to ECIT calls, the North Precinct has consistently had a lower response rate than Central East. This is one of the things that I know that we've talked a little bit about PPB with, and that we're going to have to continue to follow up with this to try to bring Norths up. Right now, PPB attempts to proactively recruit from the North District. And as Mr. Geisler said, there's technical assistance that I think we're looking forward to talking with PPB with in terms of some other alternatives or some other other tactics to try to bring up North's response rate numbers. Section 7 is the employee information system. An employee information system is designed to identify potentially problematic members and to provide some type of intervention to address the potentially problematic behavior. Within this section, one of the things that we've seen, or some of the things that we've seen, are supervisors doing consistently conducting the mandated EIS reviews that they have to do, either as an officer is new to their command or where an officer needs to have it done on an annual basis, as well as the EIS entries that are required. An EIS entry is required for an officer both as part of the review process, but also in each use of force event, as well as other situations. But for the purposes of this settlement agreement, each of the use of force events that they have requiring to put entries in, we've seen that consistently happen, and with a good bit of information that's put in there that allows future supervisors to see the history of the officer. PBB is also, as a result of the settlement agreement, revised their EIS alert thresholds. They've added some EIS alert thresholds, and so we look to see whether those have created alerts, and we'll get into that in a second with some of the outcome assessment stuff. But then finally, PBB providing the administrative staff necessary to run the EIS program. For the areas that aren't currently in substantial compliance, I alluded to this a little bit during our discussion of Section 3, the use of force, but identifying the use of force outliers, not only with individual officers, but also the supervisors and teams where use of force might be elevated compared with other similarly situated officers, supervisors, and teams. One of the other areas that we need to see is we've asked the city and the DOJ to come to an agreement as to whether a comprehensive assessment of EIS's effectiveness is required for substantial compliance, and that's right now preventing substantial compliance with 116 and 117. So our recommendations for achieving that, again, is to work with the COCL to clarify the process for identifying those outliers, but also resolving that question about whether that evaluation is required. And like I said, I apologize. I know that this table is very small. In our report, it goes 2 pages across, and so apologies for the small number, or the small font size. However, what I really want to point out in this table is these are officers who have used force in the last 4 quarters. And if you look at Officer 1 had 18 use of force events over the last 4 quarters. We look at what's called standard deviations. It's a statistical process to identify how far above the mean are you with respect to the number of force events that you've had. So this officer had 18 force events. That puts them at 5.35 standard deviations. This would be considered a large outlier. Normally you look at anything over 3 as being considered outliers. This officer was at 5.35. So then we look at how many force alerts that they had received in this time frame. And this particular officer had 5 force alerts. 3 of them were sent to the RU, and 3 of them would then receive some type of intervention. I should say that for all of the interventions listed here, it was all coaching conducted. One of the things that we point out in our report is if we put aside these 2 who had 3 alerts forwarded, or 3 alerts that received some type of intervention, when you look at other officers who are who are considered outliers by the statistical definition, they don't always get that intervention. And this is one of the measures of effectiveness that we've recommended PBB look at in terms of measuring the EIS is, when you've identified these officers, what is happening with them? We can look at the numbers, and we can look at the standard deviations, and we can look at the types of force that they use. For instance, this officer, 60% of their uses of force were type 3, which again is the majority. Normally 60% are type 4. So we can look at these officers, and this is what we're really looking for clarity from PPB is, for these officers that are identified, how is the decision made as to whether they're considered truly potentially problematic, and whether they would need an intervention? And this is just something that it's something that needs to be looked at with the EIS program overall. For Section 8, officer accountability, this is a very dense section, so I might go a little bit faster in terms of the substantial compliance, but what we've seen is criminal and administrative investigations being conducted concurrently, OIS protocols being consistent with the settlement agreement, and looking at one of the paragraphs requires that all use of force complaints receive a full investigation. We've seen that this has happened in the recent last year, and we had found them to be in substantial compliance. We've also found that some police review board operations are consistent with the settlement agreement. We have a little bit of concerns with some of the other operations, and I'll get into that in a second. But also CRC operations, as well as IPR and IA's communication and transparency with community member complainants. Where we haven't seen substantial compliance yet is one of the first ones, paragraph 121, is achieving investigation timelines consistent with the settlement agreement. The settlement agreement gives 180 days to conduct a full administrative investigation. This quarter, in discussing with IPR had been under the impression, was the COCL team, that they weren't allowed to toll for protected leave. We've recently gotten clarification from the city and DOJ on this, and moving forward, IPR will be including tolling for protected leave as part of their when calculating timelines and whether compliance has been reached. Excuse me. And so we'll look at that going forward with the new tolling approach. We've also seen we've listed in our report a concern that we had with on-scene statements by OIS witness officers. One of the things that I know with this is that an SOP has been generated with respect to it, and so I anticipate that we'll update our report in the next quarter. We've also talked about needing to have IPR being supported. When IPR became independent from the auditor's office, we identified a number of situations where they didn't get the support that they needed, and so what we've suggested is a city way or a city SOP or some type of guiding document that helps identify what needs to occur when an entity isn't under a bureau, as I think every other city agency is under a bureau. So just having that be a little bit more guided. We need to see demonstrated consistency in PRBs. One of the things that we can't do is get into too much detail about PRBs because they're disciplinary. They are protected from us giving too much detail, but we've identified some areas where PRBs could be a bit more consistent. We've also talked about updating the corrective action guide directive. This is a fairly straightforward remedy where the corrective action guide needs to be posted to PPB's website and updated. And then we've also talked about holding people accountable when there has been violations of policy. Our recommendations, I think I've went through several of these already for achieving substantial compliance. One of them is identifying the themes that are in overdue cases, the cases that go over 180 days. Identifying themes in there and seeing from the front end, what can we anticipate with this type of case, with this type of event, and how can we account for delays on the front end, just being able to identify those themes a bit better. We've also talked about considering those timelines with codifying the new accountability system. The SOP for witness officers I've already kind of covered, as well as the process for independent city entities, as well as just the PRBs, the discipline directive, and again, just holding officers accountable when policy violations are found. We list a number of barriers in our report. Some of them there's remedies in place for. I think one of the biggest ones is going to be the body-worn cameras. And once those are rolled out bureau-wide, of just being able to have another source of information. Body-worn cameras aren't the end-all be-all. They are not gospel. However, they're a tool to be able to get a better understanding of what happened. And then you can take that and hold officers accountable a bit better. With section 9, the community engagement and the creation of PCCEP. Again, this is a section that we found all paragraphs to currently be in substantial compliance. We look at the PCCEP operation, and I know that not only with these types of subcommittees, but also the broader PCCEP of the meetings that you hold and the discussions that you have. It's very positive, and it's again something that should be applauded as well. We've seen improved administrative support for PCCEP by the city, and so we look at whether you guys are getting the resources that you need. The PPB, as required by the settlement agreement, needs to prepare a community engagement plan, as well as prepare an annual report. We've seen these documents developed and provided by PPB. PPB does conduct the demographic and traffic stop data analysis. I know that it's one of the things that we've said that this needs to continue to be a ongoing discussion between PPB and the community, as well. And PPB has also developed the metrics for community engagement and outreach as required by the settlement agreement. We do have some recommendations though for maintaining the substantial compliance that PPB has gotten. One of the things that with respect to the recommendations that you all make is ensuring that the city continues to be responsive to the recommendations and the needs of the PCCEP. Like I said, we continue to recommend ongoing dialogue surrounding the traffic stop disparities, what they mean, what can be interpreted by them, and what the implications are for those in terms of moving forward. We've talked about in our report the need for the mayor to meet with PCCEP. I know that this had happened in the third quarter, and so it's something that we'll provide an update on in our next report. And then finally, officers distributing consent cards when doing consent searches. Then finally, we look at section 11, which are additional remedies. These are remedies that occurred after PPB in the city had fallen out of substantial compliance in 2021. And these were remedies that were then negotiated by the city and the DOJ. 4 of these remedies are already in substantial compliance. PPB has revised their FDCRs, their forced data collection reports. These now include the dates of when completed and edited. PPB has also budgeted overtime for police training. Most recently, we found paragraph 191 to be in substantial compliance because the PPB had hired a civilian dean. They are called the Director of Police Education now. And we've met with her several times, and we're quite impressed and believe that she can lead the PPB training into new and interesting areas where we're really looking forward to how the director can continue her tasks. And then finally, releasing and sharing the annual report in a timely fashion that continues to be in substantial compliance. The paragraphs that aren't in substantial compliance for these sections, some of them just necessarily are required to wait. Paragraph 192 IPR currently is doing those investigations. There's 4 investigations that are opened up. All 4 of those are still open investigations, and so we can't comment too much on those other than they are advancing, and once they are completed with findings and the cases are closed, we'll be able to talk about them a little bit more. The body-worn cameras, like I said, this is a very important tool, and PPB has already started the process of implementing these. There was a pilot that occurred. We observed the body-worn camera training back in August. I think there's still I think some more discussions that can be had about the best path forward with the body-worn cameras, but there is movement in terms of implementing those bureau-wide. And then finally, the creation of the community police oversight board. This is the PAC. Just provided the recommendations for city code changes. And we look forward to the new accountability system being implemented in the coming years. I apologize if I went too fast. I apologize if I went too slow. But that I appreciated the opportunity, and we always appreciate the opportunity to give an update as to what the work that we've been doing, the work that we see the city and PPB doing, and where that leaves the compliance assessments and where things still need to go. Our report, as I said at the beginning, our report is still in draft form. There is still time until the 13th to submit feedback to the COCL. If you get it to us at Monday, November 13th at 5:01 p.m., nobody's gonna say no, but email any and all comments to portlandcocal@cna.org. And with that, again, I'd just like to, on behalf of the entire COCL team, just say thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share our report and to discuss these with you.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom, for again coming and putting out a lot of really great information for our community. Next, we're going to take a 5-minute break and we'll be back at 7:13, and then we'll resume with a Q&A from PCEP members and community members.
Recording stopped.
Okay, so at this time, we'll go ahead and move to a Q&A section. And for this Q&A session, like many of our other Q&A sessions, we're going to allow PCCEP members to go first if they have any questions or comments. And then in the event that, and once PCCEP members go, then we can go ahead and add in community members as well. And one last thing, we asked you go ahead and raise your hand to queue up. If you have any questions or comments that are pressing, please come off mute and speak them into the space. We want to leave the chat. We want to make sure that any question you have is really put out into the space so everyone can have access to hearing it. Malay?
I was really intrigued by the reports of statistic demographics. Is there a way where we can actually review after this meeting for better reviews of the reports? Just for my personal reading it over, I really like the reporting, especially listing the demographics of Black demographics between white demographics, seeing the use of force and difference, and keeping it for my keepsake and public reporting as well.
I'm sorry, let me make sure I'm hearing your question. Is the question whether there's PPB reports that are available that further explore those?
I like the reports that you did for the demographics. Is it possible for a copy of a review of the reports that you presented to us today?
A review of the data?
Yeah, like a copy to review the data after this meeting.
Yeah, the data that we use is available. I believe Jonas just put it into the chat. It is publicly available data, and one of the things that I know with PPB that we've long been impressed with is the force data that they make available. The force data that is online, it doesn't contain OIS events or protest uses of force. And that's just because of the way that they categorize and captured those incidents. But if you're looking at the, it always feels weird to say normal day-to-day uses of force, but for lack of a better term, that those are available online, and they go down to the officer level, they go down to the subject level, and as a data and statistics enthusiast, I've found that those data sets to be extremely helpful, and there's a lot of information that you can do as you're navigating the data.
Okay, sweet. I see it in the chat. Thank you, Tom.
Yes, ma'am.
PCCEP members, do you have any questions or comments additionally? I'm going to open it to community members. Community members, are there any questions or comments? I see your hand, Dan. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm with Group Portland Cop Watch. Glad to be able to be speaking tonight. I recognize that we are specifically talking about this report. And the report, of course, looked at, as you mentioned, the proposal from the Police Accountability Commission, which didn't come out till Q3. And your office put out an analysis of that proposal just a couple of days ago that I stumbled upon by accident, and I have a lot of concerns about that. So I'm hoping we have time to talk about that later. And I also just wanted to make a little remark that the staff mentioned that the City Council is going to be looking at a proposal, the City Attorney, based on the PAC's recommendations. But my comment on that is that it's based on the PAC's recommendations in the way that shards of pottery are based on a vase. They basically took everything the PAC did, threw it on the ground, and picked up the little pieces they liked, and then called it good. So we'll have more discussion about that later, I'm sure. How much time do I have, Ms. Facilitator?
Go ahead, and there's no one's hand up, so go ahead and ask a question. And after that, if there's still no hand up, then you can ask a second question.
That would be great, thank you. So one of the concerns we always have about these reports is that specific events get mentioned, but then it sort of gets shrugged off. I mean, I'm very glad to hear that you expressing the concern that the officers who used force like 18 times didn't all, or between 9 and 18 times, didn't all get counseled. And I think that's a really good concern. But like you described a case where 3 officers deployed their tasers at the same time, one time, which is against the policy, but it's not mentioned in that analysis of that they were out of policy. It was kind of chalked up to a miscommunication of some kind. So are you able to say whether the officers were found out of policy for violating that part of the Bureau, what the Bureau has written that they're not supposed to do, which is use 2 tasers on a person at the same time?
So the issue that happened with the taser event that we reviewed for this quarter was it wasn't purposefully using multiple tasers at the same time. And this was borne out not only in the officers' reportings, but also the supervisor's review of it, where they identified that this was an oversight that that officers should have. The general term is to say taser, 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 so that other officers are aware that you're pulling out your taser. That communication didn't happen. I think the provision that you're talking about more looks at purposefully deploying more than one taser at the same time. And in this case, it wasn't a purposeful use, but it was still something that the supervisors commented on in the after action process.
Debbie?
Hi, yeah, thank you. So in the presentation, there was a mention of, I think it was 21 items from the settlement agreement that are still in partial compliance, and I could have that number wrong, but I'm curious about if any of those 21 are items that are going to be deleted based on the discussion at City Council Day about amending the settlement agreement.
The answer is no. However, I'll also ask Mr. Geisler to weigh in on this. My understanding is that if it's not currently found in substantial compliance, then it's not subjected to the termination, either the self-monitoring termination or the outright termination, until it is found to be in 2 consecutive DOJ reports or one. Jonas, I think you know the numbers in terms of when it would be subjected to the termination.
It was 3 of the last 3 DOJ reports would equal partial termination, and fewer than that, but still in substantial compliance, would equal self-assessment with reporting to the court and to the monitor, and then the monitor's checking.
Anything that and again, I'll defer to DOJ's report, as those are the final say, but anything that would be in partial compliance in DOJ's most recent reports would not be available for partial termination.
Right.
Frida, there is a community member who couldn't raise their hand as well. So when you can get a chance to call on Ann Brayfield as well, in whatever order.
Yes, Ambry can go ahead and go next. Excuse me, is that Ann Brayfield? Okay, and you may go next.
Thank you. I did put a question in the chat, and maybe it's just now been answered, but I was wondering about the EIS section of the agreement. It seems like that was slated to go away under the agreement amendment passed at council today. But then I thought I heard tonight that it's not in total compliance. And so am I understanding now that things that are not currently in total compliance won't go away until they're in compliance? And if that's the case, how long does something have to be in compliance? I think originally, the PPB had to keep everything in total compliance for a year before the agreement would go away. And now I'm a little unclear about how all that's being proposed to work, given what just passed council today.
So I am going to try to get the exact revisions up. However, I believe what it would be is particular paragraphs within the EIS section that would however, the ones that are in partial compliance at the moment wouldn't, and I'm trying to get down to the paragraph that I know that the revisions that I know identified those specific paragraphs.
Would it be 2 reporting cycles for Tom?
It would be, like what Jonas had said, or if it was 3 consecutive reporting cycles from the DOJ or some combination of COCL and DOJ's substantial compliance would make it eligible for that.
The 2 EIS paragraphs were really the less consequential ones. One was adding a trigger, which they added the trigger right away.
Yeah.
Or threshold, however you want to call it. And the other one was staffing. And they've added the second EIS administrator, and they've maintained that pretty well. So that's not to say EIS is going away. EIS is still there. And EIS still has to have their EIS that they said they'd have. So the fundamental remedy is still there. Tom?
No, I'm looking at paragraph the revisions 249 discusses what the discrete sections are. So the EIS through 116 through 118 is EIS operation, and 119 through 120 is staffing. The immediate partial termination would be EIS staffing, paragraphs 119 through 120. I don't see 118 as one of those that would be partial termination, but let me see if that's a self-monitoring. No. So 118 would still stay as being monitorable. 119 through 120 is what would be could be partially terminated.
All right. Pastor Weisner, I see you're able to hear us now, it looks like.
No, it's still spatting in, and I couldn't do the phone because I was getting 2 different conversations going. It's kind of hard for me to follow through, but I am here, present time right now. And thank you, Frida. I also, I don't know if Debbie's hands is up. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm on my second round.
Okay. Go ahead, Debbie. Alfreda. I'm gonna please keep it in your hand because I don't know what's going on with me.
That's okay. Do you have a question right now, Pastor Weisner?
I did. In the EIS section, I was trying to follow along where it was saying that about the reporting of the supervisors or the managers getting the report. Is that the areas of out of compliance because they're not able to gather enough information from discipline officers to be able to move into areas? Is that still, was that what I was hearing a minute ago?
So EIS is non-disciplinary. So one of the things that I want to make sure of is that it's not that the officers aren't being disciplined. EIS is a pointer system that looks at the term most often used as potentially problematic officers. We see data or we see activity from the officer, or we see just their overall work attitude, or something like that, that makes a supervisor or someone in the chain of command say, this is, I'm a little bit concerned. They haven't violated any policies. There's nothing, that there's no misconduct. However, the patterns that we're seeing, or, the relational concerns that the supervisors are seeing, what can then be done is the officer is then entered into the EIS program, where then the chain of command identifies what the concern is, but also potential reasons behind the concern. And at that point, you can implement a intervention. So, as I talked about with the data that we had for this quarter's report, all of the interventions that we had seen were coaching conducted. In other quarters, we've seen officers go on monitoring plans where, again, they haven't done anything wrong, but it goes a little bit above and beyond just the coaching conducted. There's also the possibility of referring the officer to the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, referring the officer to get additional training. You can reassign an officer based on if you feel the concern is based on where they're assigned. So it really is just looking at an officer and saying, there's something here that is causing me a little bit of concern. Let's get an intervention in now before their potentially problematic behavior turns into actual problematic behavior. And then that's where the disciplinary process would come into place. EISs have been described as career saving for officers because you're getting that assistance in before it becomes a disciplinary issue.
I was wondering if I was reading it wrong, where, thank you, Tom, for that explanation, where that the supervisors wasn't getting the information into the system.
No.
No,
that's our question mainly with regards to paragraphs 116 and 117 is when the force inspector runs these data tables and says, okay, we found these officers who are more than 3 standard deviations above the mean. How is it you decide which of those officers are being truly potentially problematic? And let's say that you've got a group of 10 officers, each one of them may be considered potentially problematic. I think from the COCL's perspective is we're not clear how those 3 to 4 officers are selected out of those 10. It doesn't mean that those 3 to 4 are the wrong officers. It doesn't, but we just haven't gotten that clarity as to what it is the force inspector and the chain of command and the commanders have used to identify this person as needing that additional attention to determine if there's truly a potential problem there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Debbie?
So I have a question. Dr. Christoph showed the slide about the use of force broken down by demographics and pointed out that Black people are, disproportionately represented on that chart. So I feel like I heard somewhere that the paragraph in the settlement agreement that was meant to continue the work of the Community Police Relations Committee from way back when was one of the paragraphs that was removed from under the amended settlement agreement. Wondered if someone could clear that up for me.
I can, like I said, I'm on paragraph 250 of the amended ones. Although I don't have the full settlement agreement in front of me right now. Jonas, do you know the answer to that?
I'm sorry, I could not follow that question. So
it's 148 is going into self-monitoring, just so you know. Paragraph 148, it's going into I did a whole analysis of this, so it's all off the top of my head.
Okay, well, so yeah, can you explain that if there's still a pretty significant problem with disproportionate use of force if you're a Black person in Portland, then how come we're taking that paragraph and making it a self-monitoring going forward? Thanks.
I was not a part of the negotiations for the paragraphs that would be retained or fall out. And so I would defer to the city and DOJ in terms of the agreement about which paragraphs will continue or would be available for those for the termination or self-monitoring.
Right. Are you asking about 148? I'm trying to follow the question here.
Yeah, that's the one, 148, according to Mr. Handelman, and he's looked it over pretty carefully, I think.
Stand by.
All right, well, to be specific, though, 148 is about the traffic stops, and you're talking about use of force demographics, which aren't really required.
I guess let's get that question clarified first. I guess are you talking about the use of force demographics, or use of force demographics? Or are you talking about with the traffic stop data?
I guess what it seems to me that there's, if there is disproportionate use of force by demographics in the city, it seems like it would probably also be a good idea to be looking at traffic stops. I mean, it kind of all connects, doesn't it? And so I think just thinking that you can draw a box around one thing and ignore the other thing, I don't know, it's troubling.
I understand. I understand. I think your concerns and where you're coming from. Again, though, I would defer to the city and DOJ in terms of the negotiations that happened with the revisions to the settlement agreement.
Yeah, thank you. That's fine. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Dan?
Well, I'd like to let Mr. Barnett go first. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Barnett.
Good evening, and thank you for responding. I'd like to address my comment both to, and pardon me if I don't pronounce your names correctly, Mr. Giesler and Mr. Christoph. I'm just astounded that there could be a definition of a situation where 3 police officers discharge their weapons, tasers. You can call it it's not a tool, it's a weapon, because it's recorded nationally that tasers have not only harmed physically some people, but some people have been killed by them. But that's not my point. The point right now I'm talking about is when 3 officers simultaneously or sequentially, whatever, discharge those weapons at a human being, at a person. I don't want to just say citizen, because they could be, a refugee, or they could be whatever, but a human being, and it be decided, the officers are okay. They followed policy. No, they did not, because you said yourself a little while ago that the policy is that they're supposed to notify the other officers, I'm firing my weapon. Do not fire, I'm firing my taser. So they were out of policy right from the get, and they should all be charged with felony for attempting to kill, whether the person died or not. It was attempted homicide, and they should be charged therewith. And I want your explanation, Mr. Gessler and Mr. Krefhoff, both of you, explain that.
I appreciate your comments, sir. With one of the things that we look at as we conduct these evaluations is we look at 1, the actions of the officers, and then 2, the actions of the supervisors in conducting the review. So in terms of the actions of the officers, we say clearly that there was a lack of an announcement, that was inconsistent with the training provided by PPB. One of the things that we did see, though, however, is we saw supervisors in this incident identify the concern, issue corrective action or issue corrective correction to the officers who had done it, as well as identify policy and training implications for other elements of the event. I don't think that I can argue with the fact that this was inconsistent with training in terms of making that announcement that you had also that one officer had also drawn their taser. However, we are also bound by the definitions within the settlement agreement in terms of whether a deficiency is ongoing, whether it is a systemic problem. And one of the things each quarter we identified between 3 and 4 and at times 5 taser events each quarter. We haven't seen an issue like this arise in the past. And like I said at the beginning of this, I don't think that we're seeking to create a perfect department. A mistake was made here, an issue what occurred here. It was inconsistent with training. One of the things that we look at was that caught then? Did the supervisors identify it? Was something done? In this case, yes, that did occur. And because we haven't seen similar issues occur across the other CEW events that we have reviewed each quarter, we don't find that it is a ongoing or systemic issue. And I'm blanking on the exact paragraph right now that talks about when something is in substantial compliance and when it is not in substantial compliance. And this single incident that was identified by supervisors and was corrected, I don't think our position was that didn't create an immediate partial compliance because of how it was handled and because it was a non-systemic event.
Since you've asked for a response from me, it's not our report. This is a COCL report, not a DOJ report. Let's just give a quick background on what happened with this investigation. When we did the investigation asking for data, we asked for use of force reports for the 2-year period prior to the announcement of our investigation. And we went through those force reports, and based upon our analysis, we said there's reasonable cause to believe that there's a pattern or practice of use of excessive force against people in actual or perceived mental health crises. And we said in particular that there was an over-reliance on the use of tasers, right? You've expressed some of the concerns with tasers. A lot of people have expressed those concerns with tasers. We added paragraph 68 to the settlement agreement about tasers, and I've put into the chat the section D about the multiple uses of tasers. That was one of our concerns in our finding. It was, hey, you can't have multiple uses of tasers for the potential lethal effect unless lethal force would be called for. But there was also an intentional requirement to that provision because officers may not see the other one deploy, right? We say you should yell out taser, taser, taser so that officers know you're deploying a taser, don't have sympathetic fire of a firearm or the other taser. The policy revisions over the years, we have addressed a particular issue with this intentionality. We've said PPB, you should add to your policy, and they have agreed to do so and have done so. You should add to your policy any professions of it's intentional or not intentional, I didn't know, need to be subject to an objective reasonableness standard. An officer can't just say, oh, oops, I didn't know. Their knowing or not knowing needs to be objectively reasonable. And so what's happened over the years? Well, from the get-go, the multiple uses of tasers dropped off right away. And then there was an issue of how long is the duration of the taser use? And when it was Chief Marshman, he changed out the batteries. He bought the new batteries, the taser, that limits the discharge to 5 seconds. So even if you're pulling down that trigger for too long, it limits to 5 seconds. That's another part of paragraph 68. That's what we wanted. So we've gone from overuse to eliminating multiple uses to eliminating durations of more than 5 seconds, and taser use has dropped off significantly overall. If on this particular incident, that the COCL has identified in their report, you believe that there's a violation of policy, there is a mechanism for that in the city for the administrative investigation. IPR takes complaints. So if you want to file a complaint with IPR about that, please feel free to do so. I don't want to opine upon the criminal nature or not criminal nature and jump to a conclusion not knowing all the facts on that. I completely respect the position that multiple tasers are an issue, and that's precisely why we have this remedy in the settlement agreement. And frankly, it's been effective for many, many years.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, just to kind of put a cap on this discussion. Well, the reason I brought this up is that from the point of view of the person who gets two 10,000 volt shocks at the same time, it doesn't matter what the intent was. It matters that they got shocked with 10,000 volts times 2 at the same time. I don't know how the electricity works, but that's not right. So it should have been investigated, and the cops should have been held accountable, regardless of their intent. Okay, so otherwise, the other parts about the use of force, that analysis that you all did in the COCL report, it lists spit and bodily fluid as some of the weapons that people with mental illness allegedly used against police officers. And everybody has spit and bodily fluid. So to say that they were armed is kind of a ridiculous assertion from the police bureau. And I'm really not sure when this started. This didn't used to be one of the categories of being armed with spit and bodily fluids, but I really think that should be taken a closer look at. And I also just want to add that the box-in statistics, just in the slide that you showed before, box-ins were used 114 times in the course of a year. That means 114 times cops surrounded somebody's car and touched it with their cars, whether they were in motion or not. No, actually, that's the one where it has to be in motion, right? Because the other one's a different kind of box-in. And then they also used the pit maneuver, where they ram somebody's car and make it spin around, where we just saw somebody suing the police because they rammed the wrong car 86 times in a year, and the previous year it was only 68 times. And I really think that those kinds of vehicle interventions, as they call them, should be looked at. And for the record, and for the PCCEP, the policy about vehicle ramming is up for review until this Sunday, the 12th. Anyway, if you could comment on those two things, the spit and the vehicle interventions. Thank you.
So yeah, I can comment on spit and other bodily fluids. It's not, I know that we've talked about this with PPB a couple of times. It is not just the fact that the person has spit or that the person has bodily fluid. It's that it was used against, that there was some type of an attempt to transfer that spit or other bodily fluid onto the officer. There are concerns by police in every jurisdiction about having biohazardous and spit and other bodily fluids thrown on them. So it's not just the mere presence of it, it's the attempted use of that. In terms of the pit and the box-in, is the question just for us to comment on the increase and the increase in those uses of those force types?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of alarming how many, if you think about it, it's like once every 2 days, one of those kinds of maneuvers is used by the Portland police, like 86 plus 114. So once every 2 days. So why is that happening? Is that reasonable? Is that showing some kind of increase? And if so, why?
That is, Dan, that's, I think, one of the, one of those comments that when we get them from you, we're very appreciative of getting them from you. Let me take that one back and let me further look at those. Again, I think when we're looking at force as a whole, when we're looking at the vast majority of uses of force being those level 4s, that the 114 compared with the 842 control against resistance, it represents 4.9% of the use of force. This is also something that happens when you've got these small numbers, is that the percentages aren't as consistent as when you've got the larger numbers. But let me, like I said, let me take a look at that. Let me come back add additional context to our report where necessary. And again, this is one of the reasons that we have these types of conversations, is to be able to hear comments just like that and to be able to say, okay, that's the community comment on where our report could be enhanced and where it could be bolstered. And as always, sir, I will respond and be able to address your comment.
All right, so we still intend on moving to open public comment at 7:55. We have one hand in the queue. I saw a couple hands that kind of disappeared. So we still have 5 more minutes, and it looks like we have 3 more hands pop up. So we'll have 5 more minutes. So 2 hands for this section, and then we'll open to public comment. Samir?
Yeah, I just have a couple questions that were raised in the chat. I'm just trying to consolidate them here. Under section 8, there was a comment, Dr. Christoph, that you made. And first, let me just say thank you to Dr. Christoph as well as to Jonas for being here and your presentation. But the questions under section 8, if you could clarify what protective leave is and tolling means, and also what the changes on the tolling side, what that means for the community members who may not be familiar with that term. And then there was also a question about under section 11, specifically paragraph 192, why investigations related to 2020 are still open given the timelines. So those are community member questions from the chat I just wanted to pass on. Thanks.
Sure. So let me start off with the tolling question, and this is a very straightforward answer that I'm going to completely make complex. So the tolling essentially means that when you've got 180 days to complete an investigation, if there is a criminal investigation, a concurrent criminal investigation that's preventing you from making any more progress on the administrative investigation, you have to say, okay, we can't go any farther until the criminal investigation is done. So from this moment on until the criminal investigation is done, we're not counting those days against the 180-day timeline. Protected leave is something like FMLA. If you're injured, you can't come in, or there's some type of federally protected leave that allows you, then that prevents the investigation from continuing until that person comes back. That's also now another reason to be able to toll the investigation. Jonas just put in there also military leave, and FMLA is Family and Medical Leave Act. Thank you, Samir, for that as well. And I apologize for all the acronyms. In terms of what it will do to the investigation timelines and the ability of PPB and the city to meet the 180-day timeline, the answer is at this moment, we're not exactly sure. IPR was going to be, going forward, is going to be now tolling for those things. The methodology that IPR uses to calculate the 180-day timelines is a methodology that we had discussed with them probably, we're talking 5 or 6 years ago, in terms of how to calculate these timelines, how the new tolling components will impact the methodology that IPR uses. It's yet to be known right now. We really do need, we need a couple of, we need quarterly data going forward, and that's something that I know that we're going to be looking forward with the Q3 report, is being able to see how those protected leaves might impact the 180-day timeline as calculated by IPR. The other question, and Samir, can you help me with remind me of the question?
Yeah, it's for under paragraph, I believe it was 192, but section 11, why investigations related to protests from 2020 are still open. Thanks.
So the answer to that is not when the alleged activity what occurred. It's when the investigation was open. Paragraph 192 is a remedy. It was The additional remedies were approved, I believe, 2021. Jonas, can you thumbs up or thumbs down exactly when that was?
I think you're right. I'd have to look at the specific date.
Sure. So the investigations, make no bones about it, the investigations have gone over 180 days. They are still open. Like I said, because they are still open investigations, I'm limited in what I know, and even the limited amount of information that we do know at this moment, we're prevented from discussing because they're active investigations. Like I said, the investigations are occurring. DOJ and the COCL team have received regular updates in terms of their progress. And so, like I said, there's no question that they're over the 180-day timeline at the moment, but they are progressing, and that's I would hesitate to say much more for fear of compromising the investigation.
Okay. At this time, we'll go ahead and move to open public comment. And just a reminder, your questions here can deal with anything that we discussed today, or it can, your questions can be about other items outside of what we discussed today. Debbie, or excuse me, I apologize, Barb.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments just that I wanted to say more to the PCCEP, but it's like a question for the COCL and whatever, which is that if everything goes the way the city thinks it's going to go, then there's going to be a fairness hearing on November 30th. It's already set up with the court. And I'm mostly talking to PCCEP members. If it's not going to be a fairness hearing, it's either going to be a status hearing or a fairness hearing. If it's a fairness hearing, it's going to be for the monitor. And if it's a status hearing, it's going to be like just the general quarterly status meetings that we've been having. So I don't know if PCCEP has anything else they want to say about the monitor, but looking over the, I don't know, however many page document and hearing not a huge presentation about it at City Council today, which you can see on YouTube. First of all, they passed it as an emergency, whatever bill, whatever they call it, which means it goes into effect immediately. And that's a little strange to me. And it just reminds me of I wish Sarah was here. Maybe she could explain it. Sarah Ames. Like one of those bills that they throw a lot of pork into, at the, in the big Congress and stuff where by the end, it doesn't look like anything that it started, and it includes a bunch of extra stuff. And so I just wanted to call PCCEP's awareness to that. I wanted to double check with Jonas or Tom about if I'm right about the date and the plan. I don't know if Stephanie's still here, whoever, somebody. And I will stop there because, I will stop there. Thanks.
I'm not sure that I can give any more information than what I'm about to say, so sorry that it's not comprehensive, but at the council meeting today, the city attorney's office did say that they were requesting changing the November 30th date to include a fairness hearing specific to the documents from today. But that's not determined yet, is how what they said today. So thanks.
Yeah, that's why I was stammering, but you said it much clearer. Thank you, Samir.
Pastor Weiser, is there anything you want to add to that, or?
No, there isn't.
Okay. And we'll take one more question and then we'll conclude the meeting. Dan?
Okay, thank you. Well, I got a couple of little points I want to make. First of all, I think what Ms. Rainish was getting at there is that the final version of the independent monitors that the PCCEP recommended was released on a Friday and voted on a Wednesday afternoon before you had another meeting. So in between your meetings, and even though you should have been part of the discussion about what's in that document, it's now law because it was an emergency ordinance and it's already been passed. So it really should have been slowed down. We at CopWatch asked them to remove the emergency clause and they didn't do it. And the other point that I want to get back to though is this technical assistance document from the COCL about the PAC report. And if it was truly only released on Wednesday, then the city attorney already did their damage to the PAC's recommendations. But I was just very disappointed in the way it was written. And just to use one example, and I sent a whole list of them to the co-chairs earlier. I'll send it all to you as well, Dr. Christoph. That it says that not having police on the oversight board means it's not representative of the community. The compliance office that you were part of, before you took over, for 8 years has never said that the PCCEP or the Citizen Review Committee failed to represent the community because they didn't have police officers on them. And all of a sudden it's an issue because the charter says the new board shouldn't have police on it. So I just found that to be very discouraging. You know how hard we worked for 20 months on those proposals, and now the city's really decimated them. And I'm hoping you will revisit your technical assistance thing and look at the other paragraphs and rewrite it and be more accurate about what actually the PAC said and what this represents and how it is the same as many of these other bodies and shouldn't be treated differently. Thank you.
So Dan, if I can just respond to that piece, and I'll start off by saying that I know that we do recognize the immense efforts of the PAC. I mean, we purposely made that as one of those first sections. One, not only the efforts that we observed and that we saw the hard work that went into it, but also the attention to maintaining the settlement agreement processes. Our comments relate primarily to 3 elements, and I hear what you're saying in terms of the the PCCEP as well as the CRC. I think that there's a little bit of an apples to oranges there in the sense that the CRC doesn't outright disqualify members associated with law enforcement from their membership. And so I think that's, I completely understand the reason for doing that. Where our comment came in, and I think this is something that we've really attempted to do over the last 9 years, is a sense of balance. And there's not an issue with the charter amendment and the exclusion of persons who are experienced with law enforcement. I think it's the lack of balance on the other side of making sure that if the attempt, and I truly believe that the attempt is to limit bias in the new accountability system, and you'll find nobody who is more supportive of that effort than myself, as well as the rest of the COCL team. But having that balance being on both sides and making sure that if the attempt is to limit bias, to make sure that it's occurring balanced and comprehensively and in a fair way. And so I don't think that you and I are necessarily in disagreement on a lot of the recommendations from the PAC. I know that you personally did a lot of work on it, and that should be recognized. These were just a couple of elements that we want the city to make sure that they're looking at in terms of making sure that the settlement agreement moving forward it can continue to be complied with, and that's where the crux of our comments came from.
Thank you, Tom, for taking a moment to respond to that. from Dan. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back to Samir.
Thank you so much for to everyone for being here. Thank you in particular to Jonas Geisler from the Department of Justice and to Dr. Christoph and the entire COCL team. I know there's many more folks here and probably too many for me to name all of, but we appreciate your time. Thank you as well to Pastor Weisner and the the PCCEP members who are here today, as well as all the community members who are here joining us. The next meeting of the PCCEP is next. It's a subcommittee on community engagement, and it is next Wednesday evening. And I believe, 6 to 8 as well, p.m. So, and then as previously mentioned in the updates, there is a council item that we posted about in the chat related to the oversight board, 2 o'clock next Wednesday, the 15th. You can see all the ways to get in touch with PCCEP here on the screen. Please feel free to sign up for emails and give your public comment to PCCEP if you're unable to make a meeting or just prefer to write it down. And with that, I believe we are going to wrap up the meeting and adjourn it at 8:05 p.m. Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tom.